Brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. A'udhu billahi min shaitan rajim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa afdalu salati wa tamu taslim. على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين ورضوان الله تعالى على صحابات الراشدين المباركين والتابعين بخير وإحسان إلى يوم الدين وعلينا معهم وفيهم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. So we again thank you very much for joining us for this live broadcast on the eve before the Michigan primary elections. And as we normally do around election season, be it primary time or the general elections, that we would like to uh, inform you all as Michigan residents about your rights at the polls while voting, as well as how to report if there are incidences. Let's say you get turned away from the polls, or if there are any sort of like voter intimidation that's going on at polling centers. Hopefully, there is no voter intimidation tomorrow, but in the event that does happen, we would like to empower you with some information. So now I'd like to bring on my very competent colleague, Haja Amy, who just returned back with us, part of our CAIR Michigan family, who just got back from Hajj pilgrimage not long ago. And we ask Almighty Allah to accept her pilgrimage and all of her prayers, as well as her ziyarah to the best of creation, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Assalamu alaikum, Sister Amy.
Walaikum salam, Brother Dawud.
Thank you. So we're going to go and jump right into it. And you, of course, have done this presentation before for our community members. So I'm just going to step off stage for a while you give your presentation and come back on. And then also, for those who are in the viewing audience, you can pose questions, and perhaps we can get to any questions at the end, or if there are any clarifying points that maybe need to be made, then perhaps I can add on a statement or two at the end.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. This is a very important topic as we move into midterm season, especially with the primary elections tomorrow and then the general elections coming up in November. There's always some confusion about what can happen at the polls and what people's rights are at the polls. So we're just trying to provide you with a little bit of information so that you go into the voting season with as much information as possible. So first, it's important to know who can vote. In the state of Michigan, anybody who's a U.S. citizen, 18 years or older, can vote. And you have to register to vote in Michigan in the city that you've resided in for more than 30 days. So if you've moved recently within the last 30 days, your polling place where you'll go vote will be associated with your last address. But you can change that when it comes to the general election, which happens in November. But you're voting in the city that you resided in for 30 days prior to the election. There's some discussion always around voting season about whether or not people who've been convicted of crimes can vote. And in Michigan, I can assure you that individuals who've been convicted of misdemeanors and felonies are still eligible to vote, so long as they are not currently residing in jail as a result of their sentence. So if you've been convicted of a misdemeanor or a felony in Michigan, you still have the right to vote. And once you've served your sentence, or even if you're on probation, as long as you are not residing in a jail or prison facility, you are eligible to vote. So we ask you to get out to vote and don't waive that right. So what happens at the polls? Each year, CAIR-Michigan gets a number of calls for things that are taking place at the polls. Some of them are just routine poll issues, and some of them are, attempts to stop our community from voting or fully expressing their voice. So here are some things to understand about what can take place at the polls. Every polling place in Michigan is open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. And when it's open until 8 p.m. Sometimes there might be long lines. We know voting is not a holiday in Michigan, so people vote when they get off of work all the time. So if you get in line before 8 p.m. and they close the polls at 8 p.m., you remain in line. As long as you've entered the line before 8 p.m., you are eligible to vote no matter how long it takes to vote, even if you're voting till 8:30, 9, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, as long as you were in line before 8 o'clock, they have to let you enter the building to cast your ballot. So if you get in line at 8 and they come to tell you the polling place is closed, you remain in line and you insist on voting. While you're at the polling place, you have the right to have assistance in the voting booth itself. If you need a ballot translated, there are many, many places that have ballots translated. Hamtramck has ballots translated, I think, into 2 different languages. Other cities have it translated into Detroit has it in at least 2 different languages. I think Dearborn just got the right to have it translated into 2 more languages other than English. So it's important to know that you have the right to have the ballot translated. If you go to a polling place that doesn't have the ballot translated into a language that you're more comfortable with other than English, then you have the right to have an interpreter present with you. And that interpreter can really be anybody that you choose. It can be a family member. It can be a friend. I know some of the polling places have interpreters that are standing by and waiting to assist you. So it can be anybody that you choose. Anybody that you're comfortable with is allowed to enter the ballot box with you and help you cast your ballot. We've had some issues in the past where polling places have told people that they cannot have the assistance of another voter, meaning if you show up with somebody and they're also voting, that they're disqualified from assisting you by helping you translate the ballot. And that's just inaccurate. You can't vote together in the same box, but one of you can vote and then the other one can vote. So you have the absolute right, even if the other person is a voting member that day, to have them present, anybody that you choose. Also, if you have a disability, maybe reading is an issue, blindness is an issue, or you have some other issue that prohibits you from being able to vote fully on your own, you have the ability to have any of the assistance that you need available to you inside of the ballot booth to be able to provide you with a full opportunity to cast your ballot. And you have the right to vote free from harassment and intimidation. This means members of the public cannot stand inside and bother you about who you're voting for, ask you about who you're voting for, or try to persuade your voting. Members of the candidates' parties or members of the general public who are lobbying for certain candidates, they must stand outside of the polling place and they must stand away from the door of the polling place so that people can go in and freely cast their ballots. That means if you're going in to vote, you should not be confronted by people trying to intimidate you to keep you from voting, or trying to intimidate you to get you to vote a certain way, or to try to even ask you. Voting in Michigan is in the United States in general is a private affair, meaning you have the right to vote in privacy, which means people should not be taking pictures in the polling place, sending out Snapchat videos of people who are voting. They should not be videoing or photographing people that are actually in the act of casting their ballots, and because that can be seen as intimidation. Another issue that comes up in our community a lot when it comes to polling and going to cast your ballot is ID. There's a lot of information out there about what types of ID are acceptable and what types of ID are not. In Michigan, you have the right to vote even if you don't have an ID. There are several things that you can do. The most quickest and easiest way to vote is to have your ID on you. And the types of ID that are generally considered acceptable at every polling place are, your Michigan driver's license or a Michigan state ID if you don't have a driver's license. If you have a student identification card, maybe from a college or high school or university that has your picture on it, that's an acceptable form of ID. Obviously, if your passport is going to be sufficient to help you vote. Military ID, if you are back from the military and voting in Michigan, or even if you have a license from another state. If you're a registered voter in Michigan, but your license is, say, from Illinois or Ohio, which are neighboring states, you can use your out-of-state ID to vote. There's no issues with using out-of-state IDs. If you do not have an identification photographic identification card, there are other things that you can utilize to prove your identity for the purpose of voting. And those can be utility statements. If you have like a DTE bill or a phone bill that has your address on it and comes in your name, you can use that as a form of ID. If you have a pay stub from your current employer, it has to be a current pay stub from your current employer. You can use that as an identification document to vote. If you have a government check, like maybe your IRS tax check, you can use that to vote, or any other government document that has your name and address on it can also be used to identify you if you need to vote. What happens if you don't have, if you go to the polls and someone challenges your ID, or you don't have an ID and they challenge your identification document? You can still vote, actually. A lot of people don't know this. Just because someone challenges your ability to vote doesn't mean that you can't vote, and you should absolutely vote. You should absolutely insist on voting. So, and in those cases, what happens is there's an affidavit you can fill out, and you just tell them that you need an affidavit. You want to be sworn in as a voter, and you will cast what's called a provisional ballot, and you make sure that you get your vote in. And then the Secretary of State will make a determination about whether that vote counts or whether that vote doesn't count. Sometimes we see people going to the polls and they think that they've registered to vote, but then their name doesn't appear on the rolls. They'll look you up in the book and they say, we don't have your name. I'm really sorry, but you can't vote today. But at that point in time, you should also absolutely insist on voting. Your vote matters, your vote counts, and you should not leave. If you went there with the intent to vote and you believe that you're registered, you should not leave the polling place without voting. What you can do is you get an affidavit, and you can sign the affidavit and saying that you thought you were registered and that you are qualified to register to vote, that you're a U.S. citizen, that you're 18 years of age or older, that you're a resident of the state of Michigan, and that you're a resident of the city that you currently live in for more than 30 days, and that you believe that you have been registered to vote, and you cast your ballot anyways. If you, that way there can be a determination made later about whether or not you're eligible to vote. If you don't, if someone challenges your right to vote, or they tell you that you're not on the voter rolls, and you don't cast your ballot right there, and you don't insist on getting that affidavit, then what happens is you've actually lost your right to vote, because they won't let you cast the ballot later. So it's better to insist on voting and sign the documentation, and then argue later about whether that vote should count. Because if you don't vote then it's like you've never voted. So what are some of the things that we've seen that have caused problems in the past with regards to voting? We've seen people challenge the ability to have an interpreter present. We've seen people standing outside of the polls trying to stop people from going in. We have seen helpers get told that they're not allowed to be inside the polling place to help, that they have to stand far enough away that maybe people don't know that they're there to help. And all of those things are improper. But there are ways that you can get assistance. If somebody is at the polls intimidating you, or somebody is not allowing you to have support, there are a number of things that you can do to make sure that you get the assistance that you need. The first one is you can ask to speak directly to the supervisor at the polling station. They should be the most senior, most trained official. A lot of times people at the polling stations are volunteers. They're there for the day, and maybe they got a couple hours of training, so they might not know. So the first thing you should do is you should ask to speak to the supervisor at the polling station, who sometimes is a paid employee, or sometimes is somebody who's been volunteering for a very long period of time, so they have a lot of information and they have the knowledge that's necessary to be in charge of the other poll workers. If in fact you cannot resolve your issue by going to the supervisor of the polling station, you can ask to speak with the city clerk for the city that you're polling in, and you can ask for them to have to come down to the polling station and provide you with the assistance that you need. And that person generally should have the information that's necessary to at least get you to cast your vote, and then leave it open as to whether the Secretary of State counts it based on whether you're actually qualified to vote or not. The third thing you can do is the Secretary of State of Michigan, they have a hotline number where you can call and you can report voter intimidation or discrimination at the polls, or any irregularity that happens at the polling place at all. The last thing that you should do is you should contact CAIR-Michigan. CAIR-Michigan is open on primary day We are ready and available for you. We have in the past on a regular basis shown up to polling places where we've been notified there are significant issues. We've showed up, we've resolved issues, we've monitored situations to make sure that everybody's being able to do what they need to do and that everybody's doing what they're required to do. And we've worked with city election officials to make sure that the polling places run smoothly, and that there are no further incidences of whatever it might be going on at that polling place, whether it's people being removed from the polling place or not being allowed to have assistance or not having enough translated ballots on hand and things of that nature. If you want to call CAIR Michigan, there are two ways to contact us on polling day. One is by calling our office number, which is 248-559-2247. And the second way is by sending us an email at cairmichigan@gmail.com. That's CAIR Michigan@gmail.com. And you can also report issues on our website, which is www.cairmichigan.org. That one takes a little bit of time to get to us. So if you have an immediate issue, I would recommend calling us, and somebody will make sure you leave your name, your phone number, what polling place you're at, and what the actual issue is, specifically what's going on, whether it's a language barrier issue or an assistance issue or not being able to vote type of issue, so that we can send people out to communicate with you. So we have as much information as possible. And those are really all of your rights. So just the main takeaways is if you get in line to vote, you make sure you vote. That means maintaining your space in line even after 8 p.m. if necessary, insisting that you're allowed to vote with a provisional ballot should your ability to vote be challenged, making sure that you have at least some identification documents with you, whether it's an ID or a piece of mail that has your name and mailing address on it. But if you get in line to vote, you vote. And if you have an issue with voting, then you contact the Secretary of State of Michigan to file a formal complaint, and you contact CAIR Michigan, where we can help you resolve the issue, hopefully on the spot, and also follow up with the Secretary of State regarding any issues that we see. And inshallah, we hope that everybody has a successful voting experience tomorrow at the polls. And we hope that, this provided you with enough information so that you feel comfortable going to the polls and knowing what your rights are, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Sister Amy. There are no questions that I see right now in the chat, but just to reiterate to the viewing audience before we close that if you experience any harassment yourself or see any irregularities, call us immediately. In recent elections, we've actually gone on site. Specifically, we've gone to Hamtramck, gone to Dearborn. We've dealt with issues as far as people being turned away from polls, issues about people not being accommodated in regards to translators. So these are issues that in particular, our community can be prone to, especially those who are community members whose English is second language. So please reach out to us if you see anything, and we'll try to resolve it, as Sister Amy said, on that day. And then also perhaps we can contact the particular governmental institution if need be, if there's any problems as far as any action that may need some sort of reprimanding, and as well as for us to offer training to the municipality, as we have done training for Hamtramck poll workers, specifically after some irregularities took place after the last election. So with that, my brothers and sisters in Islam, those of you who are eligible to vote, we strongly encourage you to vote. We complain about many things relating to politics in the state of Michigan or in our country, but if we're able to vote and we don't vote, then that lessens our ability to complain, right? Like, make your complaints known at the ballot box is what we advise you to do at the Michigan chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations. And with that, we ask Almighty God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make things easy for everyone. tomorrow, and as well as for the remainder of this sacred month of Muharram that we are in. And we ask Almighty God, Allah, to accept everyone's fast that they are doing, especially in these first 10 days, and all of your righteous deeds that you are doing during this very auspicious and sacred month of Muharram. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.